Today's guest is Jessica Yaffa, an internationally recognized relationship expert who has dedicated her career to helping people create healthier, more connected lives. Jessica, we're so thrilled to have you here. Welcome to the Women of Wealth podcast.
Thanks so much. Thrilled to be here.
Jessica, I met you briefly for a No Silence, No Violence fundraising event, and I'd love to talk about that a little bit and then just how you found yourself doing your work now, what you do now.
Yeah, for sure. So I have been in the world of mental health for my entire professional career for about 25 years now. I knew from the time I was teeny tiny that I wanted to do something that was people related. And so I was drawn to social services as early as I can remember. I then went through what ended up being a very traumatic relationship in my teenage years through early young adulthood. And so as I graduated college and began my career, felt very connected to the idea that I would find a way to weave in education related to the prevention and early intervention of relationship abuse. And so my career has looked different depending on kind of the era that we're talking about. And yet one of the sort of fundamental underpinnings of my work has always been supporting those who are experiencing relationship violence, along with looking at opportunities or looking for opportunities to be on the side of prevention and early intervention as well, which is how No Silence, No Violence came to be, Allie.
That's great. Not all of it sounds like was great. You know, living through the experiences, not great during the time, but obviously you've learned some lessons that have helped you be more effective, I'm sure, in your field. So let's talk a little bit about the 12 years you spent in mental wellness and organizational leadership. What lessons have stayed with you the most?
Yeah, great question. I would say first and foremost that connection is the greatest tool that any of us have. So when we are working in a space of leadership or organizational development, no matter our role, we have an opportunity to really drive motivation, retention, connected teams when we are supporting our people and feeling seen, heard, and valued. And so the greatest lesson that I have learned, or some of the greatest lessons that I've learned, are that there are a lot of myths that are circling around in our world. One being that when we talk about the hard things, it makes the hard things harder. We know that we must talk about the hard things in order to support our people in feeling understood in their experience. We also know that we have sometimes been told that vulnerability is a weakness when in a position of leadership. And I have come to learn that when I show up as a full, transparent, accountable human, it allows the people around me to also feel safe in showing up as transparent, accountable people as well. And then lastly, I would say that that I have an awareness that we are all wired for relationship. And so for many, especially post-COVID, and for those of us that are working with younger people, our sense of purpose is directly connected to the work that we do. And so if we as leaders are not clear about our people's purpose, we are missing a significant opportunity to ensure that we are supporting them well, that we are maintaining a connection with the organization for them, and that we are really utilizing them in the ways in which we are able to, that not only are best for us and for the organization, but for them as well.
I want to talk about talking about the hard things. I mentioned that it's good to talk about the hard things, and I'm interested to hear, because I'm sure our listeners, everyone's gone through something that maybe they didn't want to share, but they shared with their community. I recently spoke about having a miscarriage, and it felt, freeing to feel like I'm not alone. And how many women have also shared their experience when I do share, or people who were scared to share their experience or maybe shamed. It gave them the opportunity to talk about it too. And then sometimes we talk about it so much that we're kind of in that repetitive, staying in that space. How do you know when it's healthy to talk about and when it's, dare I say, toxic to talk about?
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that, first and foremost, Allie. And that's a really great question. A couple things that I like to think about. One is we all have, and I think I said this even just a few moments ago, we all have a need to feel seen and heard. It's one of the ways in which we experience feeling valued. And it's also one of the ways in which we experience a sense of connection, which is also a basic human need. And one of the most sort of important or impactful ways of feeling seen and heard in our experience is to know that we aren't alone. And so there is power in saying, me too, or this is something I've been through. And if this is something that you are also struggling with or have struggled with, please know that you're not alone. There's such power in that. And I have also recognized over time that the experience of being understood doesn't require another person to go deep into the depths of their story, right? So many years ago, I would share very specific details about what I had been through and was able to recognize that in certain moments of doing that, that I was contributing to a person's experience of trauma and or really taking away from their space and their ability to share because I was taking up so much of that space or room. And so I'm now able to say, I really get that. I've been through something similar, or I can really understand where you're coming from. I too have had that experience. And that sort of bridge is as impactful and sometimes much more appropriate than feeling like we have to really go into all of the very specific threads of our experience that in reverse can sometimes actually contribute to another person feeling as though they are being re-traumatized or there isn't a lot of room for their experience.
We just went to a fundraiser on Thursday night, my husband and I did for, we live in Las Vegas. There's a group here called, it's a national organization, I believe, CASA, but it's specifically for the fostering advocates. And we we didn't foster our nephew because he never had to go into the system, thankfully, but we were guardians of it. So I could see like being able to share enough so someone knows you're connecting with them. And at the same time, not sharing too much to where it's like taking away from their story or they don't have the room to share what they were intending to share. So yeah, I mean, because, I look at it like my nephew is now 26. He moved in with us when he was 11 and he's now 26. And so now I look at it like, okay, it never ends. Raging child never ends because he still, needs support and has questions and whatnot. But it's totally different now. He's not in a place of neglect anymore like he was when he first came to us. So it is interesting, but I also find myself like when I'm connecting with people who are in those positions, like it's easy for me to write a check for it. I don't know if I have the mental or emotional fortitude to be an advocate for another child because it definitely was the hardest thing I've ever done. So it's like there's definitely spaces for that. I could see that in the work that you do as well. As if a woman comes to you who was abused, domestic violence or whatever, and then you share your story and then she feels like she doesn't have either re-traumatized, like you said, or she doesn't have the same amount of story or something like that, then she could feel like she's not getting the support that she needs, right?
Correct. Absolutely correct.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about the work that you do with relationships. Now, it's interesting because, we don't talk about it too much in our society, but there's several different types of, domestic violence. It comes in a lot of forms, right? There's physical, emotional, mental, financial, and we don't really talk about the financial piece of it a lot. But we've had someone on our show before that talked about financial abuse and what that looks like. Is that an area that you work with your couples or your women with?
Absolutely. So I want to just acknowledge that the work that I do with No Silence, No Violence and the work that my coaching institute does is separate. That the coaching institute really focuses on healthy relationship development, healthy communication, building healthy connection, etc. No Silence, No Violence is focused on education related to relationship violence and supporting survivors. So never do we work with couples who are experiencing any form of abuse. That's not ethical. And it's something that actually goes against what it means to be providing safe spaces. There's a power and control dynamic there that makes it unsafe. So if I'm doing couples work, I'm doing couples work under the umbrella of the Coaching Institute. Sure. And without there being abuse, often couples acknowledge that one of the sticky spaces or one of the spaces that contributes to greatest conflict is financial. And so it absolutely comes up in couples work often, whether it be that we have two really different stories around money coming into the relationship, and that story is sort of playing out in ways that contribute to conflict. One of us is a saver, one of us is a spender. We have very different philosophies around when we should be checking in with one another about spending. Do we combine accounts and or do we keep separate accounts? These sorts of conversations are happening all the time in my couples work. When it comes to no silence, no violence, we absolutely find that almost always financial abuse is, if not sort of the presenting primary form of abuse, is certainly a contributing factor. And so whether it be the bank account gets drained when I threaten to leave, or I've been given an allowance throughout my relationship with no access to money beyond that, or I get scrutinized for every penny that I spend. These sorts of things are also incredibly common when we look at abusive relationship dynamics. So the topic of money shows up throughout sort of the continuum of my work.
Can you talk about, your institute work and the topics that you're discussing with couples? Is there a common theme that most couples struggle with when it comes to financials?
Yeah, I would say that it is very seldom where you have two people that come together that have a very similar background, story, or belief system specific to money. Almost never. And so when we are talking about money, we're really talking about money is just sort of the symptom, if you will, right, of there being competing values and or a difference in prioritization. And so what we really are talking about then is how do we ensure that both people feel seen and heard in their experience? How do we ensure that both people are able to name what feels most important to them about how money is dealt with? And where are both people willing to practice flexibility and or expansive thinking? So what are our non-negotiables and what are our negotiables? And how do we support one another in honoring those non-negotiables while also understanding that both people are going to be in a position of exploring where they are willing to be flexible and or expansive in their thinking, even though it's going to be uncomfortable.
Sure would be nice. It sure would be nice if when you applied to have a marriage license, you had to take some classes, kind of like you do for a driver's license, because I could really see that a money class could be very important for healthy relationships from the get-go, because I think most people don't realize their money differences until they're actually living in it, And it's strange that most couples don't talk about that before they get married. They might talk about how many kids they want to have or where they want to live or whatever, but they don't talk about especially like I was 37 when I got married. So it's like I already was pretty independent. So was my husband, and so we had to figure a lot of stuff out about that, and I'm figuring that most couples do have to figure out their money, the way they're going to move forward with money. And of course, as you have more wealth, as you get more successful, some of that stuff changes. But at the core of it, those are the things that I think are really important.
Yes.
And I like that you use the word thinking expansively rather than I get this, you get that. It's like an opportunity for the other person to expand their thinking.
And really, conversely, I mean, it's not just about like how do we, what happens as we build wealth. The other piece of this is that even if people are talking about kind of where they are currently, right? We're about to get married and this is what I'm making and this is what you're making. And let's sort of talk about how we're going to join forces here. Very seldom are couples talking about what happens when we have kids or what happens if one of us loses a job, right? It's not even just about the building of wealth, which we all hope that we experience, but there are these other real life scenarios that most of us are navigating at some point or another in relationship. And so typically the focus is, if they are talking at all, the focus is around kind of what it looks like as they move into marriage, and anything beyond that is certainly either feels irrelevant and or isn't even in a couple's purview.
Yeah, I think that's true.
Yeah.
I think most people don't really go into it thinking that they're going to have to deal with some of these things that they watched their parents deal with probably, or didn't, if they were in a single family home. Why do you think so many women struggle to prioritize themselves and communicate their needs when it comes to this and other things in the relationship?
We could talk about this for 3 hours.
I know.
If I was just to like offer a couple of overarching statements, I would say, I mean, it's our conditioning, right? We're receiving messages from the time that we are teeny tiny from all around us, not just our family systems, but the society that we live in and all of the people and forms of input that are contributing to our belief system from the time that we're really small about a woman's role, about sort of being focused on self as being selfish, about sort of what it means to be a good mother, a good wife or partner, right? That means that we are self-sacrificing, that we are putting others first, that we are showing up for others' needs, that we are making ourselves available in order to minimize discomfort. And so all of that contributes to our feeling like there isn't a whole lot of room left for us. And if we're wanting to make room, it indicates that we're selfish, or it means that we are not showing up as good friends, partners, daughters, mothers, etc. So that I think is sort of like at the root of all of it. And then I think beyond that, we have a lot of competing priorities. We very much care about our friends, our aging parents, our children, our partners. And so it can feel really difficult to figure out how to create and maintain balance that allows us to be fed and feel supported while also showing up for the people that we really care about, not even just from a place of obligation, but real desire. So I would say that it's a combination of those things.
Yeah, women like to do many things, not just two things at once, but many things and juggle all of the things at once. So if a woman is, you're meeting with a couple and you kind of find these traits happening in the woman where she's not taking time for herself, what kind of conversations or phrases do you support her with to have these kinds of conversations with her partner?
Yeah. So I don't want to determine for any woman or couple what it should look like for them, right? Some of us need a lot more alone time or a lot of time with friends or a lot of time moving our body. And others may need less of those things. And so I'm not determining for anyone what it should look like. However, I might be asking questions like, if we are to look at sort of your whole person, I'm hearing you say that you're feeling really filled up and connected here. I'm hearing you say that you're feeling really filled up and connected in this part of your life. I'm not hearing you talk a lot about this part of your life. I'm curious, is this something that feels important to you? Is this something that at one point in time you felt more connected to? And what did it look like then? I'm curious about when you think about sort of your ideal scenario when it comes to opportunity to care for yourself and to feel connected to the things that matter most to you. What would that look like while acknowledging that might feel impossible in this moment? And then I sort of weave some of those responses into our creating of some goals. It sounds like one small step that you're saying might be helpful is. And so maybe we have an opportunity to not think about you failing because you're not able to do all of these things. What if we really celebrated some success around you being able to implement this one thing? How would that feel? And does that feel manageable? So it's obviously very individualized. Each conversation sounds different depending on what feels most connected for each person I'm working with. And yet I'm really asking questions more than I am making statements. And then based on what comes back, offering some input in ways that feel manageable and meaningful for her rather than my attaching my agenda.
That's awesome.
I feel
Now, I have a question. I don't know how much experience you have with working with the different generations, but that's one thing that we talk about is generational wealth. And you did mention early on about, if you're working with younger people, that you have to learn a little bit different communication style. Are you seeing, going back to your nonprofit work, are you seeing that the younger generations have less abuse than maybe the Gen Xers and the baby boomers may have experienced? Or do you see that the education that's happening are just making people aware of different ways that abuse is out there?
Yeah, it's a great question. I would say this is a very sort of generalized response. and it's not based in statistics, it's just based in my own observation. I would say that the insertion of things like social media and tracking devices and these sorts of things have contributed to a more complex relationship abuse dynamic, that the expectation has become that we have access to one another all the time, that we have influence over who our partner is hanging out with and who they aren't, where they're going and where they're not, how they're choosing to spend their time, etc. And so some of that has actually become so normalized that it's confusing for young people to know or to understand what sort of normal or healthy really looks like. And if it's happening all around us and we're ingesting all of these messages that it's just sort of the way it is, that that our work in terms of no silence, no violence becomes more complicated when we're working with young people as a result. So I would say that there's a lot more information out there around what we might consider sort of the more obvious dynamics when it comes to relationship abuse, right? The black eyes, the broken bones, the hitting, punching, threatening, etc. And yet there's this underlying experience of control that can exist that has become so normalized that we have to really work to create safe spaces for young people to be able to sort of dissect where they're feeling pressured or what actually feels comfortable for them or what it looks like to have boundaries in these areas.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I'm just thinking about all of the technology these days. Like, I mean, a tracker that we have on our kids, somebody could have on your spouse or whatever.
Right.
And, you know, you weren't supposed to be in this zip code or whatever. And then that could turn into something, you know?
Yeah.
So,
I didn't think about
it's really scary.
I didn't think about the progression of technology can actually make someone feel even more alone, I guess, and more tracked.
That's right.
I mean, my husband and I share our locations with each other, but I never thought about it of being used against someone.
Yes.
So that can be pretty scary. You talked about boundaries. Why do you think it's hard for women to maintain or keep boundaries?
It sort of goes back, Allie, to the part of the conversation we were having a few minutes ago. The idea, first of all, we ingest messages that boundaries are selfish, right? We have all sorts of input that supports this idea that when we set a boundary, it either means that we're being a bitch or aggressive or selfish. And so I think we can really sort of find ourselves fighting against that. And we also have these competing priorities that can make it really difficult to know what's okay for me to say no to and or to create an intentional yes around in terms of my own self-care or well-being. And so that sort of plays a role, as well as this belief that like being a person of our word means that we stand firm in what we have said. And so the idea of one of the ways in which we express boundaries being that we have a right to change our mind can also be confusing, right? I said yes, that I'd show up to this thing on Friday. And even though I'm recognizing that I don't actually have the capacity, I feel like I need to follow through in order to be someone who's considered to be reliable or trustworthy. When really being reliable and trustworthy means that we're being transparent in our actions and in our words, and that we're also owning our capacity or lack of capacity. And so it requires us to sort of rewire or redo a lot of those belief systems and ingested messaging in order to feel like we're able to ask for what we need.
We've talked a lot about what some unhealthy patterns might look like. What does it mean to truly thrive in a relationship?
I often say that I am much more concerned when an individual or a couple says to me, we have no conflict. Everything is great. Everything is perfect. We communicate beautifully. We never have moments of disconnection, disruption, etc. That freaks me out far more than when an individual or couple says, yeah, we've got some sticky spaces, or yeah, this thing tends to really be a trigger for us. So I want to just acknowledge that healthy relationship means that we are able to navigate conflict well, not that we don't have conflict. And that's, I think, a really important just acknowledgement, because often people can feel like if there's conflict, it means that we are in an unhealthy relationship, or it means that we're in the wrong relationship. And it's really about how we navigate that, with the acknowledgement that if we don't have any conflict, it means that we're not feeling safe enough to talk to one another. So I think that's first and foremost. Second being that there is self-accountability. So in a healthy relationship dynamic, I'm able to own my part and my person is able to own theirs. There is not blame shifting, and it doesn't feel like one person is often having to own the collective responsibility. So one of my sort of favorite, if you will, tools when we talk about navigating conflict, it is that we show up after a moment of disconnection or disagreement with that self-responsibility, something that I could have done differently in that moment, or one way that I contributed to that disconnection is. And then my partner is able to say, thank you for that. And something that I'd like to own. Hard stop, right? Not, but you did that and therefore that's why or I only responded that way because you. So accountability. And then also that we have some balance, that we are able to have fun together, that we are able to have our own independent life, that in healthy relationship, we also aren't looking to one person to fulfill all parts of us or needs. And so the expectation is that we have different parts of our lives individually, and that we champion one another and having access to those hobbies, those friendships, etc. And that we also then have ways that we like to be in connection with one another. And then I think lastly, that we feel unconditional regard for one another. We acknowledge that we're going to have different opinions, different needs, different ways of thinking about certain things. And even in those moments where we recognize that we have a difference of opinion or a difference in need, we're able to really hear one another. We are able to seek to understand one another's perspective, and we're able to recognize our negotiables and non-negotiables. So both people are able to stand firm in the things that feel most important and feel honored in that. And we're also able to acknowledge where we're each willing to stretch and be flexible rather than everything being a non-negotiable.
I like that. So I got, being comfortable in communication and taking responsibility is super important. And then having some type of individuality within your relationship. And then kind of just showing pure kindness to the other person. And that is what creates a thriving relationship. And it shouldn't be perfect, but that having constant communication, you can come from a place of kindness when something upsets you or annoys you. And I know I don't always do that. It's like we're very quick to say, I hate when you do blank, instead of doing blank, do you mind? And that comes off with more kindness. So thank you, Jessica. Is there anything else that we didn't ask that you want our audience to know about or for you to share?
I would just acknowledge, and you both have said this in different moments, but that most of us are reaching out when we are experiencing some sort of crisis in our relationships. And when we talk about independent women, thriving women, women who are feeling whole and connected to themselves, the ways in which we are able to really embody those ways of being is when we are proactive in seeking support, not when we are in crisis, but when we feel like, it's good enough, and yet I'd like to experience thriving. Or I'm feeling satisfied enough, rather than, I think that there's an opportunity to up level here. And so would love to just encourage the collective to be thinking about ways in which we're able to really proactively access support rather than waiting until we're in a moment where we feel like we have nothing left to give, or we're so full of resentment that we're on our way out the door. It doesn't have to be that way.
Yeah, I think, over the years, I think that, as your relationship matures, hopefully the individual does as well, and that you are growing together. And I know for us, my husband and I, we have a lot of connections within our church where we have opportunities to do these classes. Sometimes the classes do create like a little bit of a challenge because, it brings up something that maybe we weren't really focusing on. You don't always we don't always have something going on. So sometimes it can bring up some stuff, but at least we're working through it together, you know? So I think that that's really good advice to kind of work on your relationship when it's not in a crisis mode, work on it when it's happy and somewhat healthy, so that you can even be that much more happy and that much more healthy.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to go into our lightning round, but before we do, can you let our listeners know where they can connect with you, through your website, social media, any books or programs that you have going on, and any upcoming initiatives?
You bet. So the Coaching Institute is www.jessicayaffa.org. You can also reach out to me there for information about No Silence, No Violence if you're interested in either accessing support, becoming a volunteer, and or supporting us in any other way. And Instagram is No Silence, No Violence or Jessica Yaffa Coaching Institute.
Great. Allie, take it away.
All right, so we are going to do a lightning round. So they're either one word or short answers.
Okay.
You ready? Okay.
Ready.
What's one piece of advice you'd give your younger self?
Embrace that you are worthy just because.
What's one thing you're saying yes to in this season of life?
As many sweets as I desire, rather than judging myself for it.
Fill in the blank. You know you're wealthy when?
You measure your wealth by who you're around and your experience of gratitude rather than dollars.
So speaking of dollars, what's one purchase under $100 that has improved your life?
My last pair of shoes.
Love that. If you could have lunch with any woman from the past or present, who would it be and why?
Michelle Obama. I want to know where she shops, but I also want to pick her brain about how she is able to show up so beautifully as a wife and a mother while also maintaining such a grounded sense of self.
Yes. Amen. Well, Jessica, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and experience with us today. And we appreciate your passion for helping those in need and then offering insight for couples or people who may be in a relationship so that we can communicate more effectively.
You bet. Thank you so much for having me, ladies. It was my pleasure. Really grateful.
Yes.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Take care.